In Soviet Russia, violent crime was considered a Western disease, a symptom of capitalist decay. The Soviet government proudly claimed, "There is no crime in the USSR." But that illusion was shattered by one man. Andrei Chikatilo, later called the Rostov Ripper, murdered more than 50 people between 1978 and 1990. For 12 years, he hunted in silence, while the Soviet system failed repeatedly to stop him. His case would become one of the most gruesome criminal investigations in modern history. But it wasn't just the horror of the crimes that shocked the world. It was the staggering number of mistakes, denials, and lost opportunities that let him continue. Born in 1936 in Soviet Ukraine, Chikatilo's childhood was marked by trauma and scarcity. He was raised during the aftermath of the Holodomor famine. According to family stories, his older brother was kidnapped and possibly eaten. Whether or not that's true, Chikatilo grew up in a world of hunger, violence, and fear. He was bullied at school and struggled with impotence and social isolation, developing deep psychological scars that would follow him for life. On the surface, he appeared ordinary, a quiet man, a teacher, a father, a factory worker. But behind closed doors, he was disintegrating. His first confirmed murder was in 1978, a 9-year-old girl named Lena Zakotnova. He lured her to an abandoned shed, assaulted and murdered her. Suspicion initially fell on him, but the investigation was rushed. The authorities needed a quick resolution, and another man, Alexander Kravchenko, was convicted and executed for the crime. The real killer walked free. Over the next decade, more bodies began to appear, young girls, boys, women, all murdered in similar brutal fashion, usually found in wooded areas or near railroads. Yet Soviet police refused to acknowledge a pattern. The idea of a serial killer was politically taboo. The government insisted such crimes only occurred in degenerate capitalist societies. That denial created a vacuum where Chikatilo thrived. Investigators faced enormous pressure to produce results. Dozens of innocent men were arrested, many coerced into confessions through beatings and threats. At least one of them was executed. The media was tightly controlled and could not report on the murders, which meant the public remained unaware that a predator was on the loose. Parents weren't warned, children weren't protected, and the bodies kept coming. Chikatilo had a distinct pattern. He usually approached his victims at bus stops or train stations, offering them food, money, or promises of work. He targeted those who seemed vulnerable: runaways, orphans, students. He led them into forests, then attacked with a knife. The killings were frenzied and cruel. He stabbed his victims dozens of times, mutilated their faces and genitals, and in some cases, removed organs or flesh. Some reports suggest he even ate parts of his victims. His inability to perform sexually was central to his pathology. The violence itself, the domination, the blood, that was where he derived arousal. It was a disturbing case of paraphilic behavior that had never been seen on this scale in the USSR. And yet, the investigation remained blind to the psychological aspects of the crimes. Eventually, a breakthrough came. Not from the police, but from psychiatry. Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky, a professor and criminal psychologist, was brought in. He pioneered the use of profiling in the Soviet Union, something that until then was dismissed as Western pseudoscience. After reviewing dozens of crime scenes, timelines, and victim profiles, Bukhanovsky built a portrait of the killer. A man in his 40s or 50s, likely impotent, intelligent, but socially awkward. Someone who traveled frequently for work. He described not only the killer's behavior, but his emotional triggers. For the first time, Soviet law enforcement had a psychological roadmap. But even with a profile in hand, Chikatilo remained elusive. The final break in the case came by chance. In 1990, he was spotted acting suspiciously at a train station known for several recent killings. He was picked up by police, questioned, and released. But detectives continued watching him. They noted inconsistencies in his movements, and when his blood type didn't match the crime scene samples, they dug deeper. At the time, Soviet forensic science was limited. They hadn't yet confirmed that semen and blood types could differ in some individuals. Chikatilo fell into that rare category, and earlier tests had misled the investigation. In 1992, Chikatilo went on trial. It was one of the first major cases in post-Soviet Russia to be televised. The courtroom was chaotic. He shouted at judges, stripped off his clothes, claimed to be the victim of a conspiracy. Some believed he was trying to appear insane to avoid the death penalty. But the evidence was overwhelming. He was found guilty of 52 murders and sentenced to death. On February 14, 1994, Chikatilo was executed with a single gunshot to the back of the head. His final words were never made public. The Chikatilo case remains a haunting reminder of how systemic failure can be just as dangerous as the criminal himself. The refusal to admit the existence of serial killers, the mishandling of forensic evidence, the wrongful imprisonment and execution of innocent men. These were not just errors, they were tragedies. Political ideology, denial and pride allowed a monster to keep killing long after he should have been stopped. After Chikatilo's conviction, several key investigators were quietly honored behind the scenes, but not publicly celebrated. In the collapsing Soviet Union of the early 1990s, there was little appetite for admitting that a serial killer had thrived for over a decade. Some detectives left law enforcement entirely, disillusioned. Others went on to help modernize Russian criminal investigations, bringing in profiling and forensic reforms that might have once been considered Western myths. Had the police followed the evidence instead of chasing politically convenient answers, many lives could have been saved. Chikatilo is dead, but the consequences of his crimes and of the cover-ups still echo. His story forces us to ask, what happens when a system built on silence meets a killer who thrives in the shadows? The answer is not just chilling, it's unforgivable. In the decades since Chikatilo's execution, Russia and the world has changed dramatically. Surveillance cameras, improved forensic science, and digital databases make it far more difficult for serial killers to operate undetected for years. Today, DNA analysis and behavioral profiling are core tools in investigations. Information spreads instantly across borders. The kind of systemic silence that allowed Chikatilo to flourish would be nearly impossible to maintain now. But his legacy still lingers. He remains a case study, not just in evil, but in what happens when a system protects its image more than its people.